One of the ideologies behind psychiatry is globalism, globalisation. And psychiatrists really are globalists. They engage in globalist ideology and drugging to murder humans. They drug with chemical compounds over 20 million children around the world, and some of the globalists involved, psychiatric globalists, are Brock Chisholm, J.R. Rees, and in particular now with this act being proposed in Western Australia that target children. So they've targeted adults all over the world historically over the past 200 years, and now it's getting worse because the globalists are targeting children. That's the progression where it's progressed.
We have swallowed all manner of poisonous certainties fed us by our parents and school teachers. If the race is to be freed from its crippling burden of good and evil, it must be psychiatrists who take the original responsibility.
Brock Chisholm's declaration typified the psychiatric onslaught aimed directly at our school system.
They actually said the purpose was social control, not to pass on knowledge, not to give him something so that he can go into the world of work.
In 1950, psychiatrists and psychologists from around the world met at the White House to propose a total reorientation of the public school system.
The White House Conference on Mental Health in the 1950s was a landmark that served to bolster the idea that schools would serve their communities better as mental health clinics than they would as institutions of learning.
In the early 60s, the world of psychiatry started to really go places in this country. Little by little, it came into our schools, our educational system.
And by 1965, it was written into law. Psychiatrists were given the green light for the wholesale labeling and drugging of school children.
A child is labeled ADD or ADHD the minute he can't sit still for a 10-15 minute period of time, or he talks constantly, or ignores the teacher completely. That will get him and earn him an ADD or ADHD label.
The labeling of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, went into full swing in 1987. Within 1 year, 500,000 American children would be diagnosed as ADHD. By 1994, that number had soared to 4.4 million. In response to widespread public alarm at this apparent epidemic of mental disease, the U.S. government-funded National Institutes of Health assembled a panel of prominent doctors and psychiatrists to explain to parents and educators exactly what ADHD was.
I would like any member of the panel to describe a typical ADHD in terms of symptomatology. Mark, would you like to, since you see them in your practice?
I think the panel has been frank, and the difficulties here are immense in terms of these. It is hard. It's very hard to know how to answer this question. They cannot, even when they are as if driven by a motive. There are some good clinical descriptions. And I think, I think the part of the problem is the profession keeps changing the diagnosis.
At this time, we do not have a diagnostic test for ADHD. Therefore, the validity of the disorder continues to be a problem.
But this shocking admission did not stop school psychiatrists. 2 years later, the number of American students diagnosed with ADHD had shot up to 6 million. Today, 20 million children worldwide are labeled with some form of learning disorder, a diagnosis often made in a matter of minutes.
We would sit behind a two-way mirror along with the parents. We would then look at the child. We would do small manipulative activities with them to see where their deficit was. It was wrong what we were doing. We were looking at a 5-minute glimpse of this child's life and saying, okay, here you go. Here's a little pill, take it, you'll be fine.
Those little pills like Ritalin, Adderall, and Concerta are classified by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration as highly addictive substances, right along with cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine.
When I was on the Ritalin, it made me just feel like totally different, like I wasn't even who I was.
I was, flipping out, was twitching, going crazy.
I felt like I was out of it all the time, like I wasn't there, I wasn't human.
You're just a zombie, pretty much. You do what you can just to get by and just don't do anything extra.
My mother never teased me, but she thought I really had ADHD and I was wrong, and I had something wrong with me. So I thought she'd feel bad and feel sorry for me if I died. But then again, I thought that she would miss me a lot, and I also love her a little more than I wanted to kill myself. And so I stopped when I realized that.
The abundance of prescription medications created a new income source for kids, selling their meds to their schoolmates.
It's called kitty cocaine. They take the Ritalin and they just repackage it and they sell it on campus to the kids because it's like speed.
I figured if I was going to do drugs, I might as well make it worth it. And I ended up doing street drugs, and then I ended up getting into it really bad.
We're looking at marijuana and other things as being gateway drugs, and actually the so-called medications are a greater gateway drug.
The Ritalin drugs are backfiring big time because if the child is already disruptive and he takes cocaine, he's going to be a lot more disruptive after he's taken it. It is not going to calm him down.
Boom. She got on the drugs and her personality changed, her behaviors changed, it became erratic and dark and violent, and it was just a nightmare.
He kept having adverse reactions, becoming very, very angry. He could not control his behavior. He couldn't control his temper.
He was on 5 different psych meds, Prozac and lithium, and he was 7 years old. And he was unable to function. He would have rages and then crying and all kinds of just violent rages, grabbing knives and all of this.
The list includes 15-year-old Kip Kinkle withdrawing from Prozac when he shot 22 classmates, killing 2 after murdering his mother and stepfather at his home in Springfield, Oregon. 18-year-old Jason Hoffman on Effexor and Celexa when he opened fire at his California high school, wounding 5. 15-year-old Sean Cooper on a mix of antidepressants when he shot students in Idaho. And 17-year-old Eric Harris on Luvox when he and partner Dylan Klebold killed 12 classmates and a teacher in the bloodiest school massacre yet, Columbine.
And all of this overshadows the very reason children came to school in the first place, to get an education. Since 1970, the United States has fallen from 9th to 28th place in worldwide academic standing. While during that same period, the number of American school children labeled with learning disorders has skyrocketed, and the sales of ADHD drugs have multiplied 32 times.
Children don't ask for psychiatric drugs. Children don't ask to be diagnosed. They don't want to be called crazy. So you have to ask the classic Roman question, legal question, cui bono, who benefits? The people who makes the diagnosis.
Psychiatry
should actually go into government, that politicians should listen to psychiatrists. Psychiatrists should be in every parliament and should direct and monitor political activities.
Psychiatry, in little more than a century, has infiltrated society on a global scale, and not by accident.
People aren't aware that in 1940, a prominent British psychiatrist, Colonel J.R. Rees, addressed the National Council on Mental Hygiene and set the agenda for psychiatry for the next 60 years. Since then, psychiatrists have been given authority in nearly every sector of our society, with tragic results.
We must aim to make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. Public life, politics and industry should all of them be within our sphere of influence. We have made a useful attack upon a number of professions. The two easiest of them, naturally, are the teaching profession and the church. The most difficult are law and medicine.
Rees's colleague, psychiatrist G. Brock Chisholm, co-founder of the World Federation for Mental Health, later expanded upon psychiatry's plans.
To achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas.
To implement their master plan, American psychiatrists convinced the U.S. Congress that mental illness was a national threat that only they, with vast increases in funding, could solve, and thus began massive U.S. government expenditures for psychiatric research, which have climbed from $1 million a year in 1946 to $1.4 billion today, an increase of more than 139,000%. As psychiatric influence spread across America, it also spread throughout the world. Behind crisis after world crisis, you'll find the handiwork of psychiatry. Example, Serbian psychiatrist Jovan Raskovic